Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Daniel Mangana. This is your daily dose of happy, and we're so happy you decided to join us today. And Daniel, I was actually working on the episode that we did last week because I'm preparing various episodes for release on local cable access. And so I was kind of reviewing some of the stuff we were talking about. It was kind of fun. It's kind of good. It also occurred to me too, because we'd gotten an email from somebody after, if you'll remember correctly, we tried to answer a question that somebody sent in last week. It was a listener who listens to us on PRN, the Progressive Radio Network in New York. And she'd had kind of a question that was kind of all over the place. And we were saying, basically focus a little bit more on we can help you out. And I mentioned this because we got a letter about that from somebody else who's not a regular listener. And this person, her name is Chris. Chris's letter basically reinforced for me that I need to be making a point more often because PRN runs us regularly on their network. PRN is basically it's largely a political network. It's liberal politics, progressive politics. And there are shows like ours that are not politically oriented shows, but they have an audience that's kind of used to hearing that kind of stuff. So I have a feeling that we create a little confusion unwittingly just because the listener was used to hearing that kind of stuff. So I'll read the letter and then I'll give a response. If you want, you can give a response too. But I just wanted to kind of clear things up for listeners who are listening to us on PRN. And once again, I want to reiterate, we're really grateful that PRN does run the show on their network. They've been doing it for a number of years, and we really, really do appreciate it. Anyway, Chris wrote to say, on PRN this morning, I heard your response to a letter from a listener who was wrestling with a multitude of complex ideas and worthy environmental values by identifying the complexity, which is, in her opinion, a valuable insight, but then seemingly dropping the ideas in favor of simply going for what would make the listener happy. At least that's what I think I heard. To me, it seemed she was raising valid issues. It seems normal to have conflicting values, at least if one is engaged in the fullness of life. So I found your simplification somewhat disturbing because it seemed to advocate dropping complex environmental and global values in favor of a me-first philosophy. I'm sure that is not what you meant. So thank you for writing in, Chris. And again, I just wanted to reiterate, we don't actually exist on this show in order to address political issues. We'll sometimes bring in illustrations about, we'll refer to a famous political figure or something like that. Not because we're engaging in the politics, just because it illustrates the point that we're trying to raise about, here's how law of attraction works, or here's how source energy works, or here's how people tend to relate to stuff and end up leading themselves in directions they don't necessarily want to go in their own lives, things like that. We aren't really talking about the politics at all. So it's very understandable that you would get confused. I get it. You're listening on a network that very often is talking about political stuff. I want to reiterate, though, you made a very interesting point, and I think I'd kind of changed the way that I would express it. But you said that we addressed it as a me first thing, and that's true, because this show is really all about helping people to help themselves in their own lives. Again, since we're not addressing political issues, we're here addressing how can people get the better kind of life that they're looking for. And to kind of use an illustration we often bring up on the show in a variety of different contexts, it's kind of like when you're flying on a plane, especially if you have a child with you. And you're flying on the plane, and you get on the plane, and the flight steward at the top of the aisle runs through all the emergency instructions. Here's what to do in an emergency. And they say if for whatever reason there's a lack of oxygen and the oxygen masks come down, you're to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your child. Why? Because you have to be conscious in order to be able to help the child out. You have to help yourself first before you can help the child. And that's really what we were trying to tell that listener. Help yourself first. You can't really address anything else in the world until you're in a good place. So hopefully that clears things up a little bit. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Daniel, but
I wouldn't even gone that much.
You wouldn't have gone that far? Well,
I wouldn't have gone that far.
I'm trying to be respectful to a radio audience that is very kind to include our show. And
I know.
I appreciate that.
Just like you get to choose who you vote for, you get to choose what you listen to. And if it doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to listen to it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So
I think a lot of energy goes into this sort of stuff. Like you had to listen to the whole thing. I don't agree with this. I must now take more energy, more time to tell them that I don't agree with this because it's So if anybody's listening that doesn't agree with something that I have to say, if we're going to engage in a discussion about why you don't agree with it, that's fine. If you just want to complain about not agreeing with it, then don't bother, because I probably won't listen to the rest of what you have to say. That's me personally. Not in this instance. I'm just saying in general.
Well, it's kind of it's not the way I was going to go about it, but I did want to bring up the fact that this episode is being recorded shortly before the American election. And in many cases, it's going to be played after the election. So we're kind of around that election season. And one of the themes that's playing in general across the population, particularly here in the United States, but also abroad, is all the different ways that people are feeling anxious right now, regardless of whether they're political or apolitical, regardless of whether they're left or right. Doesn't make any difference. There's a huge amount of angst going on. And the reason that's important to us here on the show is we regularly talk about how important our own mindset is. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of address the general broad idea of, well, there's all this anxiety going on out there. What can we do about that as individuals? Not what can we do about it as a society? What can we do as individuals to kind of bring our own anxiety under control? So I figure that's a starting point for a conversation.
Okay. Well, why don't we start with identifying what anxiety is in the context of this conversation?
Well, it's a lot of things, isn't it? I mean, it's going to be different from one person to the next. In the political context, I guess you could say that for people on the right, they're anxious about whether or not the left-wing candidate is going to win, and for people on the left, they're anxious about whether the right-wing candidate is going to win. And you could just break it down to a whole list of things, but basically, it's people getting anxious about stuff that I think kind of illustrates the ways that they individually feel out of control. And maybe that's kind of a broad brush, but I think there's a lot of that out of control feeling going on.
We're dialing it in, but what I'm really want to kind of cut into is, what does it mean to be anxious? Not what are we anxious about? What does it mean to be anxious?
Oh, good
and then
question.
What is anxiety? Because if we're going to combat a devil, we must know what the devil is.
It's a great point. Can you bring us home on that one? Because
I have a definition, but which is that we're going to the future, a future that we don't want, and bringing the emotional response of that as a reality back into the now.
Similarly, I think we could also say that we go into the past, because so much of the stuff that people get anxious about is based on, well, this happened in the past. X happened in the past. I mean, election related, there was the Donald Trump victory in 2016, which surprised most of the population of America and upset a whole bunch of people and excited a whole bunch of other people. But the point is that it's an example of what we often call a tape that keeps playing in the background. Like, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. Or it's going to happen again, depending on your point of view, So I think that we could also say anxiety is tied to playing tapes from the past, not just projecting into the future.
Well, everything that we're looking at now, we're looking at it through the lens of what's happened in the past. So the way that I see you is based on my experience of you in the past. So that fear that we have of something in the future, that stepping into it and bringing it back now happens because of an experience or a fear of something that's happened in the past, whether it's to us or something that we've heard or something that we heard of, and so on and so forth. So yeah. I would offer that everything is through that lens of the past, because that's what creates the slide that we see things through. But specifically with anxiety, what we're talking about is, because I can be like, oh God, this happened, and that's it. I'm not experiencing the discomfort of that now. I'm not having a response now. There are plenty of people that don't want Biden or that don't want Trump or whatever to be in the driver's seat, but they're not all having a disruptive emotional experience now. They're not all experiencing anxiety. Some might not like it, but they're not experiencing anxiety. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And you're right, because what we're saying here is that anxiety is an emotional response to a situation. Just because we're thinking about something doesn't mean we have a particular emotional response. Anxiety is a particular kind of emotional response. Yes. One of many possible responses. Mm-hmm.
But specifically one that's tied to a fear that an outcome is going to happen.
Yes.
I'm not anxious about a vampire flying through my window.
Hopefully.
Because I don't believe that vampire is going to come through my window.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a fear about that. Therefore, I don't have a response now that one might class as anxiety. Whereas, do I have a fear about hurricanes? I just went through a hurricane. We had hurricanes here last month. And when was it? Last month, month before last. Now, I wasn't anxious. I was concerned and took precautions. We've got the hurricane shutters, we got supplies, we hunkered down, but I wasn't anxious about the experience. There are people who are anxious. One of our neighbors was anxious about being by herself and came and stayed with us because she was anxious. She had fears about the outcome that were disabling her from feeling safe in her own home. And so she came to come and stay with us. Two different situations. So when we're looking at people that are facing down anxiety about what's going on politically, what's really happening is they're projecting their fears into the future, experiencing that and bringing it now, and then being caught up in that loop is what I would offer is happening with anxiety.
I think it's a great explanation. I as you were describing that, it also occurred to me this is like right in the middle of basic law of attraction, source energy type conscious creator theory, and that is anxiety happens when we keep focusing on the same thing over and over again that we don't like. We keep playing the same thing through over and over. That's the tape that we were referring to, and I see it a lot in people, particularly who are anxious about the election cycle. They'll run through the same scenario over and over again. They'll tell it to their friends. They'll type about it on social media. Then they'll do it again on social media. Then they'll go read an article about it. Then they'll do it again on social media. Then they'll listen to a radio program about it. And then they'll do it again on social media. And it's just an endless, I'm just going to keep contributing to this thing that's making me anxious, that's making me frustrated. Not realizing, I don't think most people realize that they're creating their own anxiety when they do that.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Right. There's a symbiotic relationship between the choice that you're making, the experience that you're having, the choice that you're making, the experience that you're having. And half of that loop is unconscious because you have that unconscious feedback of the experience back to the emotion. But then once we have the emotion, we get the opportunity to break the loop and make a different choice and therefore cut the cycle. But so many of us are blinded by our unconscious commitment to be in that cycle, blinded by the unconscious addiction to the effect of our body on being in the cycle, that we don't actually ever leave the cycle. We just end up stuck in the cycle.
Yeah. I was actually doing some, I don't know what to call it, research perhaps. I involve myself in political groups on both sides of the divide, mainly for the purpose of doing research into how people respond to the various kinds of things we talk about here on the show. Not that I'm not going in there to like teach them how law of attraction works or anything like that, because I know that's just not going to go anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what I want to know is, how do people respond if I slip an idea in here or there that might be sympathetic to them, or that I think might be sympathetic to them, that they could latch onto? And what I notice, this is a very consistent pattern. It happens on both the left and the right. It's that if I am trying to slip an idea into somebody who is really hammering an anxiety, and you can tell they've been just doing it in comment after comment, post after post, it's almost like they can't hear what I said.
Yeah, the reticular activating system kicks in. They can't see anything else other than
Exactly.
their story.
Yeah. They're so tied into the idea that this can be the only thread, this can be the only take on the thread for that matter, that they can't hear anything else. And it's an interesting phenomenon. I mean, it's kind of sad in one sense, but it's interesting to see just how powerful the human mind is when it comes to setting that kind of path for ourselves. I mean, while it's not necessarily a path I would pick for myself, I have to admire how single-minded they are about it, because that if they were to take that single-mindedness and apply it in other ways, my God, the things they could create in their lives would be just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, but do they want to create those things? And this goes back to my whole, stop lying.
Yeah.
Like, do you really want to?
It's true. It's true.
The mind doesn't lose at anything, or the mind always wins. The unconscious mind always wins. It has 100% success rate in getting what it's moving towards. And so if what you're moving towards consistently is anxiety, then that is the unconscious commitment to being anxious. And until you address that unconscious diction, we're wasting our time even talking about you not being anxious, because
That's
that's
true.
what you
Yeah.
play out, because that's what you do, because that's who you are.
Well, then let's assume that we're reaching some people today who recognize, you know what, you're talking about me. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. I'm talking
Hmm.
about me. And let's assume, for the sake of discussion, they're actually willing to take some steps. They're
Okay.
willing to maybe consider, rethinking and reconsidering their approach in life, and maybe even changing a few things up. So I'm not sure exactly how to proceed with that particular conversation, but I figure it's a starting point.
Well, for me, it's always going to come down to what's the micro shift.
Mm,
How can we start developing some kind of momentum in the direction of this new outcome that we want? And what is that new outcome? To say I don't want to be anxious is very different to I want to feel whole, I want to feel at peace, I want to be resourced to be able to handle whatever outcome presents itself. It's very different to I don't want to be anxious, I don't want to do this, I don't want to. So what do you want to move towards?
mm.
What is it that you want to move towards? Identify that, and then we could start talking about what the micro shift is, what the next step, the baby step is to move into that.
That's a
Maybe
big deal
it's,
too. That's a very
I,
big deal.
I actually had
Because,
someone that I was coaching,
oh yeah,
not a business owner, and I prescribed him not watching any mainstream media for 30 days.
uh-huh, okay.
Maybe that's going to be your micro shift, not watching the mainstream media for a week and chilling out.
It'll probably be like any other addictive withdrawal situation too,
100%.
because he'll probably go through, the shakes, so to speak. Oh my God, I got to have my fix of the
Mm-hmm.
latest news that's, constantly making me feel so anxious. But it's worth it. It's worth doing. And I can tell you, I remember going through exactly that myself.
Mm-hmm.
I did it kind of at the instigation of another co-host, Joel Elston, who used to be on the show regularly. And Joel had done the same thing, and told me that he had really great results doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
he didn't really challenge me to do it. I kind of challenged myself. I thought, let's give that a shot, see what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And yeah, it took a few days to get away from it, but
It took some time to
it did.
break the
Yeah, it took a
addiction.
little bit, but it didn't take all that long.
Mm-hmm.
And once I did stay away from it for a few days, the first thing that surprised me was how little I missed it. I
Hmm.
mean, I would have thought that just because I had had so much exposure to all that news and negative stuff and coverage and all the fear mongering and so forth, I would have thought that that would have like stuck. It didn't stick.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure why that was, and that may not be what most people experience, but it surprised me how quickly I just kind of lost interest in it. And
Well, the
this
thing
is,
is,
you have to understand, I was a political science major in school. This was a big deal for me.
yeah, but at the same time, you've also been doing work on yourself that was
Mm,
probably waiting for you to take that physical step to step into it. It's like when I say about the that the action piece actually starts to create a space for receivership of what you've been intending to go for. In this instance, what you've actually ended up doing was receiving work that you've done into your life now as a different emotional response to the news not being there.
mm,
So this emotional experience was waiting for you to just take that step to anchor in and accept it. In this case, it was a simple step of no longer watching the news.
yeah. And within about a week, not only was I not missing it,
Mm-hmm.
it was going to be pretty hard to talk me into going back to it. I was done with it, because you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I had been doing considerable work on myself up until that point, so I'm sure that played a significant role in it. But I guess to my mind, it just illustrates. I mean, if I was a political junkie for
Mm-hmm.
decades, you know, literally I was, and if I can leave it behind and find not only having no significant side effects within a week, but finding
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't missing it, hey, anybody can do it. This is anybody's availability. Anybody could just jump on that bandwagon, and it's not like your typical process. We talk about doing meditations and affirmations and all this other stuff. You don't have to do
Mm-hmm.
anything. You just stop watching the darn thing.
That's it.
That's the
And
whole thing.
it's very rarely is it something complicated.
Hmm.
This is the thing. You was I personally, I find it very easy to see how dedicated someone is actually to something that they claim to be.
What do you mean by that?
Because if I tell you that try something like don't watch the news for a week, you claim, yeah, I'm committed to my personal development, blah, 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 blah. But all you have to do is not watch the news for a week, but then you're watching the news the next day. Well, there's the truth of how committed you are to the old new timeline and the old timeline. Which one has your allegiance, should we
That's
say?
true. Yeah, that's very true.
Because
Because
the
you
big
have to want
change,
it.
yeah,
You,
and the big change is very, 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 very rarely from a big thing. It's normally from the little things.
that's true. It's true.
We have
It really is an amazing point, but it's a very simple point. You have to really want it. If you don't really want it, you can try to talk yourself into it, but you got to want it on some level. If you don't, you're not going to have anything to draw on.
I would say not even you have to want it on some level, you have to want it on every level. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Okay, fair point.
It's
I'm not
just,
sure
it's
that I
just not
actually
going to
wanted
happen.
it on every level, but I certainly wanted it enough. I found
Yeah.
that out.
But the thing is that wanting it on every level and the level at which you want it on every level are two different things. So there has to be the alignment with, is there am I energetically untied? Am I mentally focused? Am I committing to that with what I'm doing? That's where it is. Not how much is my vibration aligned with it? How certain am I? Just a maybe is all you need with the certainty. And a simple focus energetically. And a simple thing, and you're on the way.
Yeah, and that makes sense because there was not a big, it's not like I had to make a big emotional commitment. It was a
Mm-hmm.
fairly minor commitment, to be honest.
Mm.
And it didn't take there was very little strain at all. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we were talking about anxiety before. About the only thing I was anxious about is that I didn't know what the current headline was, and that lasted about 5 minutes. It was
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking an extensive withdrawal period here.
Mm-hmm. But again, even the slightest withdrawal for some is going to be too much. They're just not going to be able to let go of the commitment to the payoff internally of the current thing long enough to go and grab the new. Again, demonstrating where their allegiance is.
That's a really key word you just used, payoff.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we probably don't think about when we're talking about this kind of stuff, most of us as a population, that
Mm-hmm.
there is with stuff that we really would rather leave behind, some sort of an addiction, some sort of bad experience, whatever. We don't really think about the fact that there's a payoff to staying with that thing we don't like. But
Mm-hmm.
there always is. There's something going on. Maybe it's subconsciously. Maybe it's something that we're regularly aware of. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always something going on that, however toxic it might even be, is
Mm-hmm.
still that payoff. It still makes it worthwhile to do this thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. And again, just staying in line with the simplicity. The mind always wins. Just hold in mind, you don't fail at anything. The mind always gets what it's going for, what it is going for. And if you're trying to go for something that you haven't got the mind on board with, nothing's going anywhere. But everywhere that you do get to, it's because the mind was on board. So that means that this pattern of behavior that's playing out consistently, that tape's running, is running because that's what's programmed in at the unconscious level. And until that's addressed and changed, there's not going to be a different experience. It may differ for a little bit, but you're going to come back home.
So that raises the question, who's in charge? Is the mind in charge or are we in charge?
Who are we?
Well, I don't know about you. I'm me.
Well, the unconscious mind is running the show 90 to 97% of the time. So who is in charge?
I like to think I'm in charge. Maybe I'm egotistical in that way, but
You're
I
in
think I'm in
charge
charge.
no more than 10% of the time. No more than 10% of the time. And that's someone that's very, very critically aware. The rest of your experience is running unconsciously.
It's both an interesting thing and a little bit frightening. to think of that.
Or depends on the relationship that you have with your unconscious mind, because that
Yeah.
97% can be supporting you as you decide to experience your life, or not supporting you.
And as we pointed out, even if it's supporting us negatively, it's still supporting us. It's just supporting what we really don't want.
Well, it's supporting what we don't want consciously, but unconsciously, what we desire is always going to play out.
Yeah.
Doesn't effectively, it doesn't really matter what you want consciously if you haven't impressed that on yourself unconsciously and created the alignment with it.
Which
That's why a lot
is,
of people are trying to do law of attraction using tools and practices and aren't getting anywhere because they haven't got the whole of them on board. They're raising their vibration every morning and not addressing the limiting beliefs that are blocking that download from the cloud to their hard drive. It's just not going anywhere. You can put as many checks on the wall as you want, or do as many happy clappy things, as many check-ins, read as many books. If you haven't addressed your vibration, it's not going anywhere.
yeah.
This is alignment as I teach it anyway. This is where the alignment, the logic behind the alignment can't be denied. Unless all of those pieces are on side, you're not going anywhere.
Which is where the whole idea of being a conscious creator comes into it. Because
Yes,
conscious creation is literally recognizing that we have the ability to pre-program that subconscious mind.
exactly. We have the choice about where we're at with a vibration, where we're at with our beliefs, where we're at with our actions. Is a choice always an easy one? No, because sometimes the pull is very strong. But that's why I say not everybody really wants it, because if we're talking about undoing a lifetime, decades in some instances, some people half a century of programming, is it likely that's going to be an easy job? No. So you have to ask yourself, do you want it enough to do the work that will be required of you to change your state of being to represent that new outcome that you want?
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. And that describes me. That's where I was at when I first saw The Secret, the movie. Not getting me?
Your sound is a bit funny.
Oh, well, we just had a helicopter go over by. That may be affecting the sound. I'm not sure. But
Okay.
is it clearing up?
It sounds echoey, like a really weird.
Okay. Well, we'll just trust that Zoom is going to clear it up for us.
Okay.
Because I don't know what else to do.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to program Zoom to do this. Let's see, where was I going with that? Well, we were talking about the subconscious mind. We were talking about the pre-programming. Oh, and yeah, where I was going is the ability to program basically gives us the ability to decide how to control our lives. So when I was dealing with being exposed to The Secret back in, I actually saw it 2 years after the movie came out, so I saw it in 2008, and then kind of dealing with some of the things you were talking about. Why am I not making any progress? Why is anything not really going on here? It took me a while to realize, I mean, at the time I was 55 years old. You know, I went through most of my life before I even found this stuff. You know, so I have kind of a lot to unprogram or reprogram, depending on how you want to look at it. And it was overwhelming. It was quite overwhelming at first. I mean, first of all, I was thinking, how on earth am I going to monitor those 50,000 thoughts I have every day? So that one really threw me for a bit. And then when I learned about you could do it through emotions, that helped some, you know, but still, we're talking about doing a reprogramming job, and I didn't know where to begin. So I kind of did what you teach without realizing that I was doing what you teach. I just said, well, I'll just do one. I don't know what else to do.
Start with one.
I'll just do one, you know. And then I did another one, and then another one, and that's essentially what you talk about with microshifting, just doing one little thing at a time. And what does happen over time is that the reprogramming does happen. You start to look, or I started to look at things a little bit differently, a little bit more differently. I began to recognize and appreciate how every moment of the day that I spent trying to look at things differently, reprogram my approach, actually paid off. It wasn't just about doing an affirmation in the morning, like you're saying. You know, if you can focus on doing some meditation in the morning, if you aren't doing anything about what's going on the rest of the day, you might as well not do the thing in the morning. There's no point to it. You're just kind of contradicting it, you know. But if you do go through the day, I can't remember. Abraham Hicks has a term for that. segment intending. If you basically go through little segments intending what you're going to do with your next 15 minutes or your next hour or your next 2 hours, it actually does produce results fairly quickly. You start to notice it. I really noticed it as me not, first of all, not feeling anxiety. Anxiety was certainly part of what I was dealing with, not feeling fear, and not feeling trapped. That was probably the biggest feeling I had. I felt like I had trapped myself, to be perfectly honest. And I was coming out of that trap. And when I came out of the trap, it was like, wow, I'm amazed. I didn't think that was ever going to happen. And it happened by just doing it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more.
And that's all it is sometimes, just doing it a little bit. Because and you know what, there's 2 points on that. Number one, the mind doesn't automatically come up with these programs that it's holding. Our vibration doesn't automatically just set to something. It's what it's programmed to do from the choices that we've made consciously or unconsciously, or learned, accepted, reinforced, and reinforced and reinstated over time. So when we practice being in a different vibration through, whether it's sound frequency healing, whether it's through some kind of spiritual practice or mindfulness practice, whether it's doing your morning rampage or doing your affirmations in order to get your vibe right, that must then be followed through with, what am I doing with those voices, the thought quality? What inputs am I giving to the mind? Because every single input is either reinforcing an existing program or disrupting it to create a new one. Am I consistently disrupting the old and reinforcing a new one? If not, then it's going to stay. Am I making choices as I go through my day as the person that I am or the person that I want to be? What conversations am I having? Where am I going to eat my lunch? If we talk about, bring this to abundance, for example, am I still shopping in the discount aisle and then saying that I'm abundant? I'm abundant. Oh, cool. I can't do that. It's too expensive. Too much money. Oh, I can't do that. You're charging what? I'm abundant. with the check on the wall. Like, where can you? Where does your mind believe that that's actually going to create anything?
Well, I will say one thing in favor of that, and that is at least that that's what we call fake it till you make it, and at least one thing happens when you fake it till you make it. For that brief moment in time, you at least threw a monkey wrench in. You may not have actually changed anything, but
I would say you just
shook it up a little bit.
I'd say you're just blowing at it, not even a monkey wrench.
Okay. But from my perspective of 50 years of having built up all of what I built up, anything was an improvement. I mean, just the littlest thing was an improvement.
I got you completely.
So I won't completely dismiss the value of that. I think where people tend to kind of fall down with the fake it till you make it is they stop there.
Yes.
They just stop there. You can't stop there. That's a starting point. It's not a finishing point. It's not even an in-between point. It's a starting point.
It's a disruption technique. It's laying the foundation for, rather than being the end goal. I'm just going to pretend I'm a millionaire and run up my credit cards, living my millionaire lifestyle.
Oh God!
and the millions are going to come to me. Bankruptcy is going to come to you, bro.
Yeah, no kidding.
Collections and charge-offs are what are going to come to you, bro.
Yes.
And I've seen this all the time, especially in certain spiritual circles. People run up debt I'm going to this event. I need to be in the energy of it. Everything's going to come. My abundance is going to come. But they're still shopping in the discount aisle, right? They're still talking about, oh no, they're offered opportunities to move forward and get an expansion. Oh no, I'm going to get it from the quantum field, blah, blah, blah. All right, bro, whatever. And I've seen this in my own experience with even people, for example, who've come into my work and they said, oh yeah, I don't need to do this. I'm just going to meditate instead. I don't need to do all of this stuff. I'm just going to meditate. I'm going to get it. I'm going to tune into my abundance. Yeah, tune it, but you got to turn the radio on and turn the volume up.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. One of the most, I love the thing that you talk about just now about shopping the discount aisle versus the regular price aisle. I'll kind of modify the example by saying shopping in the supermarket versus shopping at the local farm market. Because farm markets tend to be more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
but they tend to be far less expensive in terms of the quality of the goods that you get.
There you go.
And it's an amazing thing the first time, especially if you've been kind of locked into buying in the discount aisle by going to the supermarket and getting the cheapest stuff you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make that shift that one day, okay, I'm going to blow some extra money
Mm-hmm.
on the expensive vegetables. That's the way I was thinking about it at the time. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
blow it on the expensive vegetables. And that move was terrifying. I'm not kidding you. It was, well, we were in a really bad financial place at that point. So it
I'm
was
with you.
terrifying. And it was exhilarating at the same time. It
Gangster.
was both.
Mm.
It was both terrifying and exhilarating. And there was a piece of me that was saying, will this really work? And another piece that was saying, whoa, that was a big step. It was both at the same time, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, I just want to impress upon the listeners and on myself, as I say it back to myself, that what really matters isn't even the action, it's where the action's been taken from.
Mm.
Sometimes people are shopping in the discount aisle because they literally they need to eat and that's all that's there.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between consciously going down the discount aisle and being grateful for the fact that you have enough money to spend this money on yourself to get the food that you need for yourself versus, oh, I've got to shop in the discount aisle to keep my pennies. But I'm abundant. I've got to keep my pennies, but I'm abundant. Difference.
Very big difference.
You know? I don't know if I've told the story on the show before, but I remember that somebody came to me once. They were offered the opportunity to go to an event. They meditated on getting to the event and they were offered the opportunity. Someone couldn't go. They'd offered them their ticket. And they're like, but I don't know if I should do it. I said, why? Because I really can't afford to go.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So why are you going to go? I really need to go. I really need to go. So the desire to go was from a space of lack in your life being lack without this experience. So you're not going to get anything from it anyway, because you're coming to it from lack for it to save you. The other piece was the stress, the financial stress that's going to come from you going to this event. What is it going to do to you emotionally? Is it going to leave you resourced to be in a conducive space to create? Well, no, I'm going to be stressed. And well, then that's going to hamper your ability to manifest and create other things too. So then let's come down to it. Why are you rushing to this one? Are there not going to be more in the future? Yeah. Well, then all of these things are coming from lack. All of these things were coming from lack versus I want to go to this one because I'm in joy at the idea of going to this particular one. I know there's going to be more in the future. I want to go to those too, but I really want to go to this one. I feel called to go to this one. Point one. Point number two, do you know what? I don't have the money, but I know that things are going to come together. I'm not coming from lack. It's like, I trust that the resources for me to do this in flow and without me being restricted, I'm going to expand into this. It's very different to, oh my God, I'm going to have to charge it on the credit card. How am I going to do that? Or I'm going to have to go and borrow it from mum or this or that. Two completely different scenarios.
Yeah. And I want to point something out too, because like I said, I went through this, my wife and I went through it shortly after I started the podcast, actually. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, I had enough information through some great co-hosts to understand the lack concept. Mm-hmm. And I had a pretty good idea that, yes, a lot of the time I was feeling lack. And mm-hmm. I was also, through expressions of gratitude and appreciation and other approaches, I was also at times able to experience the flip side of it. Mm-hmm. What was interesting almost doesn't even do service to it. What was startling about it is that while I was going through the process, I would flip back and forth between the two. Mm-hmm. I would feel myself in the place of lack, and I would consciously bring myself over to the other side, to the side of plenty, and then bang, I'd be right back in lacking, and then I'd pull myself. It was a constant tug of war, flipping back, and it's exhausting. It's literally exhausting.
And that's why I say, what, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 people, they're not ready to put that work in.
Yeah.
They'll have the first flip back and forth. Oh, this is too much. I can't do this.
Or more precisely, this doesn't work.
Or yeah. Oh, Abraham said it works. It's a scam.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not real. No, it's just work, bro. Stick with it.
But it's worth it. It's really worth it.
It's worth it.
And there's something else that comes along with it too that I want to mention. This is something that I've written about this, and I've told a story about it before, and I won't go into the whole story. But there was one particular segment of our lives where we ended up moving from Virginia to Connecticut, and at that point in time, literally everything was about to fall apart, and it didn't, because we were doing all this work. And while we were going through it, it felt like we were riding this crazy, out of control roller coaster, just absolutely insanely out of control. And when we came through it at the other side and saw everything that had happened, literally, I think we were in shock because of the way things played out. I mean, it played out the way the law of attraction teachers said it plays out. But it's one thing to hear about it or watch it in a movie or read about it in a book. And it's another thing entirely to experience that ride. That is, shock is the only word I can think of to describe it. It's stunning. It's like, what just happened to us? And we were talking about it for months afterward.
The thing I love, really, 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 really love about this is that it wasn't some pretty, oh, I came to the light of consciousness, and there the fairies brought me all of my abundance, and everything was lovely and bright and sweet, as half the bloody ads on YouTube and Instagram will have you thinking is the way this works. You went into the trenches, you stuck with it, you came out on the other side, and now you can look back and say, oh my God, it is exactly what it said on the tin. It wasn't always pretty, it wasn't always ugly, but I'm here and now it's beautiful.
And to be honest, it took a while to see that it was beautiful. Seriously, it did. Because it was, I mean, there was a portion of that story that was so painful, and I won't even reiterate it right now. It was so painful to my wife. When it came to her and me sitting down to write it for a book, she couldn't write it. She couldn't revisit it. It was so painful what we had gone through, even though we had come through the other side.
Wow.
Yeah. And ultimately, we've been able to get to the point where we could talk about it, we could write about it, and so forth. But you go through some of these things, you're basically put through a ringer, depending on what place you're coming from. We were coming from a pretty raw place. So I don't say this to scare people. That's not my point. My point is to say this stuff gets real fast when you put the work in. And you just kind of got to be ready for the fact that it's going to get real. And it is something of a shock. It's beautiful at the other end when you can kind of, especially when you have 2 or 3 years to look back on and see the perspective that way. It's like, whoa. I mean, it's just mind-blowingly good. But yeah, that roller coaster in the middle of it is not all that much fun. So, brilliant. Interesting discussion we're having here about this. I didn't think this was where it was going to go, but it's beautiful. I like it a lot.
Where did you think it was going to go? Did you forget that this was a Thursday show?
I didn't know where it was going to go. I knew we were starting with the letter from the listener. That's all. I knew we were starting with her letter, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go. But I like the way this
and I want to just quickly loop back to that. I don't want her to think I'm just like dismissing her, because sometimes people can find me dismissive. It's not. It's just I protect my energy very, very, very ruthlessly, and if something's not going anywhere, and if we're not having an exchange of ideas, I'm not interested. And some people might say that's selfish or whatever. Yeah, put myself first. Exchange of ideas, I'll do. If it's just like an opportunity for me to sit and just hear what you've got to say without, we're not exchanging anything. It's just you telling me why your way is the right way to do things. Okay, God bless you. I'm out.
I hear you. And I can easily say I hear you because I used to be one of those people. So it's, I'm serious. I know that's hard to believe, but I really was.
You will hear me and come into the light.
Well, maybe not quite that, but.
No? I was thinking because you're tall, I was like, you will hear me. Or looking down and come into the light.
I have conversations with my sister periodically. My sister was kind of into this general ballpark of stuff long before I was, and I asked her recently, if 20 years ago I told you that this was where I was going to be right now, what would you have said? She said, I would have fallen out of my chair. And that's literally true because it was so completely different from where I am right now.
Well, if you ever wanted testament to the power of LOA, here it is. Hear me now, the power of LOA. You will come to the light. I know I've got issues, but it's all beautiful.
Well, actually, that does tie into the other concept I wanted to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably, this is maybe a little bit too advanced for the conversation we're having right now, but I think it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is learning how to appreciate the value of what we didn't like. And the reason I say that is it's part of the way that we learn to take the power away from that thing that we didn't like. That power is kind of what creates that addictiveness that you were talking about, that addictive subconscious behavior that keeps replaying over and over and over again.
So we're talking about developing a conscious awareness, like a conscious relationship with it.
Yeah. Yeah. But more than that, it's also about finding, we're not saying, I'm not saying that you should like the thing that you didn't like. That it's not like you're supposed to say, suddenly I like this thing that I really disliked intensely. That's not what I'm driving at. It's more about, can I find things about it? Can I find aspects to it that I'm okay with? And focus on those instead. For the purpose of taking my attention off of that thing I don't like so much and putting it onto something else that I like better. And that's, I think, probably the greatest skill that we can develop as conscious creators, learning to find where's the silver lining, so to speak. Where's the part of it that we can latch on to and say, yes, I'm glad of that. I approve of that. And eventually, by doing that often enough, we do get to a point where, you know, we have that perspective from years forward, looking years back, saying, you know, that was really hell that I went through, but boy, did I get a lot out of that. Boy, did I get a lot out of that. And I don't know where I'd be today without that.
That's where I was when I had my big thing on the 13th of February, 2018.
You even know the date.
I know the date. I know the date. I know roughly the time. And it was looking back on the pieces that I'd swept under the carpet. Oh, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that. That one's going to go under the carpet. I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that. That one can go out the window. That one can go in the trash. Gathering them all and recognizing that it's through each and every twist and turn that I came to that point. And I would have gone through it all again just to get to that point.
I mentioned him earlier, Joel Elston, who was early on a co-host here on the show. He went through, I mean, I mentioned my roller coaster. My roller coaster was a little kiddie roller coaster compared to the one that he went through. This is a guy who was homeless, eating out of a dumpster in Las Vegas. He was arrested, thrown in prison for stealing, served a prison term. He went through some of the worst hell you can possibly imagine, and he came out of it and is living an abundant, successful lifestyle today. I mean, I can't even begin to hold a candle to what he's going through. Wow. And he will tell you, he's told this to me many, many times, he wouldn't change one second of it.
Well, that's true appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah. Not that he liked it, not that he wants to repeat any of it. Clearly, he doesn't want to do that. But because of all that he learned through it, because of all that he gained so much that he didn't realize he was gaining at the time. One of the most amazing stories he tells, he was arrested because he used to work for his father's insurance company and ended up embezzling money from the company and went to prison for that. And he said the best thing that happened to him was the day that they closed the prison cell door. Because finally, all his anxiety about being arrested were in the past. It's like, okay, now it's happened. And it wasn't as bad as he thought it was.
It's like, oh, okay. I guess that's done then.
And I remember when he told that story, I was like gobsmacked, like, really?
But this comes back to the anxiety thing we were talking about earlier. So up until that point, he was running to this future.
Yes.
And we normally will make it worse than we even, oh my God, Biden, oh my God, Trump, like, oh my God. And then we'll get there and we'll realize nothing's really going to change anyway. Like,
you just freaked out a whole bunch of listeners on PRN. I hope you realize.
But if you think about it, like, oh, when we get a Republican president, everything's going to be fine. When we get a Democrat president, everything's going to be fine. When we get this, when we get that, And if you actually map it out, the cycles, economic cycles, don't change or disrupt because of who's in power. Unemployment doesn't change because of who's in power. Like all of these things that people are associating with, oh my God, I need this to happen so that that happens. The cycles are still going to do what they were doing. The loops, the ups and downs are still going to be the same. It just so happens that somebody happened to be in power at the time that that happened. That's it.
Well, that's also a matter of perspective. That's where perspective is really, really valuable. And I personally, I agree with you. I mean, that's what I see too. But when you're caught up in that, you don't see that perspective. That's a hard perspective to see.
You're blind to it.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, where else can we finish up on this in the last few minutes that are available to us? Well, regardless of how the election turns out, and again,
Mm-hmm.
there are going to be some people who are listening or watching this after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how it plays out, like you said, it's the cycles will continue that have been going on,
Mm-hmm.
and that means there's going to be more opportunities to decide. Do
Mm-hmm.
we want to stay in that anxiety? Do we want to stay in the frustrations? Do we want to stay in the worry? Do we want to stay in all these things that have been, holding on to us all this time? The election actually, it kind of provides like a watershed. It's like, okay, we had a result. Okay, can we let go a little bit now of some of this anxiety we've been carrying?
The door's closed, just like Joel said.
Yeah. The door closed. Okay. The worst that could possibly happen or the best that could possibly happen, depending on your point of view, happened.
But then we move on to the next thing, because it wasn't it wasn't the event that we're addicted to. It was the experience of chasing the anxiety of the next event. So we move on to the next one. Then we'll go back to COVID-19.
And there's really the ultimate point right there.
Mm-hmm.
We get to choose what the next thing is we're going to chase.
Mm-hmm. But it's happening at an unconscious level. But we get the choice to choose. We have the opportunity, moment by moment by moment, to disrupt the loop and to choose where the focus is going to be. But we have to exercise that choice. And if we don't, hello, same.
Yeah, the sameness continues. One of the things that you talked about a couple of shows back, we were preparing for the local cable access shows. And we made that episode about the foundation that you use whenever you're talking to beginners about the subject. And you talked about the importance of basically deciding who the common denominator is in all the situations going on in our lives, whether it might be personal, whether it's political, whether it's career related, relationships, health, whatever it is, there's that one common denominator. And that's really what we've been kind of dancing around here, but I figure we ought to say it. The common denominator is us.
Yeah.
And when you made that point, first of all, I love the fact that you did that in that show. It was a great introduction for beginners. But more than that, it really emphasizes the value of recognizing our role in this stuff. So often, particularly in politics, people feel like they're pawns in a large game. They don't realize that they are creating so much of their own experience. And isn't part of awareness recognizing the role that we play in our own lives? So imagine what happens if you're a listener. Maybe I guess I'm talking right now to PRN listeners. Imagine if you're a listener and you've been dealing with all the stuff leading up to the election, and now the election comes and that door has closed, and now you're recognizing I have the opportunity to decide what's going to at least be my focus going forward. Even if I feel powerless and everything else, I have that much I can do. Well, that's empowering.
And it's a beautiful power that we have the opportunity to step into every day. But it's up to us and nobody else whether or not we step into it.
So we're faced with a choice.
Yeah.
As much as all that subconscious stuff may be going on, we still have the choice. I don't know about you. Well, actually, I do know about you, but I don't know about you. But that to me is pretty empowering. That to me is pretty cool. I have the choice, even if all those subconscious programs have been playing for 50 years, which they did for me. 50 years they were playing, 55 years. I still had the choice. I still had the choice to take the smallest step to regain control of my life, and I did it.
And here you are today as a result.
Yeah. with a bunch of people listening to me. God knew that was going to happen. I don't know. I had no idea that was going to happen, but it did.
And there's something beautiful about us actually stepping in and actually taking that choice, but also owning, and this is the thing, owning when we're not ready to make that choice yet, and being okay with that, and then asking what step we're going to take next to start to move into readiness. But we can't do that until we're ready to accept that we're not ready right now.
That's a great point. Yeah, unless we're willing to recognize where we are. That's the way I would say it. Where am I right now? Truly, not what I'm trying to talk myself into. Where am I truly? I can't take the next step because I don't know where my feet are. You know, if I don't know where I'm standing, how can I possibly move my feet? I have to know where I'm standing. And that's really what you're saying. And I agree with that. So that's kind of like taking inventory. What's going on with me right now? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? What am I thinking about? What's my dominant thought pattern? What's the thing that keeps playing over and over in my head? Is it serving me? Is it what I want? Is it really what I don't want? What would I like to change about it? Just playing with it a little bit.
Playful curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. And it that playful curiosity ultimately moves mountains.
Definitely.
Before we go, I want to remind people we have an app that goes with the LOA Today show. It's free for download. You can get it from the Play Store on Android phones, from the App Store on iPhones. Download it. It's free. It's got quite a few goodies on it. Daniel's given a couple things to it, including the Money Game ebook, which, by the way, I thoroughly recommend to anyone who wants to increase the amount of money coming into their lives. But take advantage and download it. And by the way, you also get the episodes on the app as well, so you get everything. Good stuff. So thank you once again for your insights, for sharing, for giving us something to think about, and hopefully helping Chris, who sent in that email that kind of got the whole thing started. And hopefully we haven't bent too many noses too far out of shape on PRN, but we'll see. We'll probably get more email if we do.
And I will answer them if we're having a discussion.
Yeah. We're happy to have the mail. We're happy to address it. One thing we do request, though, and this was kind of going back to the original email that Chris was responding to, try to focus in on what your question is. If you're all over the place, it's kind of hard to answer. But just pick one thing that you want us to address, because it's not like you're limited to that. You can send in another question later on. Yeah. But just give us one thing to address.
It just makes it easier for us to actually help.
Yeah. Which is, that's the whole point here, right? To help people out.
Exactly.
So thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it very much. Thank you to all of our podcast listeners as well, and for the people on PRN, and for the people on local cable access. We appreciate you too. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.